Great. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us. My name is Mark Howarth. I'm the Executive Director of the Candlewood Lake Authority and host of our first webinar. With so many people having questions about zebra mussels, we wanted to provide an opportunity for people to learn about them and importantly ask questions that we can then answer. So a few ground rules to get out of the way. To make this presentation and webinar go as smoothly as possible, we have muted everyone and asked that everybody turn their video off. We welcome and encourage your questions, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible. If you do have questions, we ask that you save them to the end and type it into the chat where our presenters will answer them for everyone to hear. This webinar will last 1 hour, including questions. I would like to introduce you to our two presenters, Neil and Steve. Neil is the Director of Ecology and Environmental Education for the Candlewood Lake Authority. Neil's background is in hydrology and environmental science and policy with a focus on water resources. He earned his bachelor's degree in ecology from the University of Rochester and his master's from Columbia University. Neil grew up on Canisius Lake in the Finger Lakes region of New York and brings substantial scientific expertise and experience from his educational and professional background. Steve Kluge is a New Milford delegate to the CLA and our Watershed Management Committee chair. Steve's background is in geosciences, and he's taught in Bedford, New York schools, on the Juneau Ice Field in Alaska, in a Cornell University program on the Hawaiian Islands, and he's currently a National Geographic expedition expert in the national parks out west. Steve's family has been enjoying the lake since the mid-1930s, and he's the third generation of his family to occupy the family's lakeside home in New Milford. Steve and Neil have been spending lots of time out on the lake together, gathering water quality data and monitoring invasive plants and animals in an effort to understand and recommend the best management practices to the various stakeholders in the Candlewood Lake community. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Neil and Steve.
Thank you, Mark. Very gracious introduction. So I'll move us along here to the actual presentation. So as everyone here knows, we're here to talk about zebra mussels, not only sort of zebra mussels in general and their science and history, but also the current state of zebra mussels in Candlewood Lake and sort of our long and short-term management strategies. In regards to so just to go briefly over tonight's agenda, we are going to start with the history and spread of zebra mussels, give you a little bit of background on that. We're going to go into a little bit of detail on the science of zebra mussel reproduction, so we all are working on the same understanding of how they grow and reproduce. And then we're going to talk about Candlewood Lake specifically. We're going to talk about the current state of affairs, what we've found so far, our short-term education and management strategies, and then finally how the community can get involved. And then we'll wrap it up with a question and answer portion. But to start, I'm going to hand it over to Steve to talk about the history and background of zebra mussels. So Steve, take it away.
So if you watch this video, you can see that zebra mussels showed up first in the Great Lakes and very quickly, just a few years, 5 years, 4 years, completely covered the Great Lakes. And the way they got there, they're hitchhikers in big tankers that came from the Caspian and Black Sea, where they're native. They came across as ballast in those tankers. And when the ballast was dumped, the zebra mussel larvae were dumped into the Great Lakes. And then transportation around the Great Lakes, even by local freighters, moved those zebra mussels around. And within a few years, they had pretty much appeared everywhere in the Great Lakes. And then if you watch, they spread very, very, very quickly. And it became apparent right away that these animals were not a good thing. First of all, they reproduce here way faster than they do in Europe. In Eurasia, they have no enemies here. And what happens is they take over water bodies. They grow in such density that they clog water intake pipes, they clog machinery, they'll attach to hulls of boats. They use nutrients that other animals would use. And so they've actually been responsible for the elimination of other useful species in bodies of water. And they as well create a hazard for swimmers. There's sharp shells on the bottom of the lake. Neil lives on one of the Great Lakes, Finger Lakes in upstate New York, and he tells me they wear sneakers when they go swimming now because of the zebra mussel shells. So they're not something that we want to see. Now, how did they get from the Great Lakes into all these other bodies of water? Well, they travel around, and we think pretty much this is the way it happens, on recreational boats that are towed from one body of water to the other, that are not cleaned and dried before they're put back into the water in a different body of water. Now, Neil, you were just circling right there. So 1998, the first appearance of zebra mussels in Connecticut in the Twin Lakes up in Salisbury, Connecticut. The Twin Lakes are a tributary of the Houstonic. But Neil, let's finish that up. And watch over there in Massachusetts what's going on. There we go. They appeared in Massachusetts in 2009. And that same year, we found them in Lake Zor, Lake Lillonona, just a few miles east of Candlewood. Now, water flows from the Houstonic into Candlewood when it's pumped up, but we have a good management. Neil, you can talk about that later. We have a good management strategy so that we're not pumping zebra mussels up into Candlewood. We believe that where they've come from is recreational boats coming in.
Great. Thank you, Steve. So I'll talk a little bit more specifically about zebra mussel reproduction. So as Steve sort of alluded to, the way that zebra mussel reproduces, they actually have a larval stage. It's called a veliger, a little bit of a funny name, but they are nearly microscopic larvae that just float freely in the water. They just follow the flow of the water. And they eventually try to find a location to settle and attach to rocks where they will grow into, or yeah, I say rocks, but it can be any hard surface where they will grow and mature into adult mussels. Roughly 95% of them die. So if you have 500,000, say, veligers in a body of water, you may only get 10,000 that actually are able to settle and attach and begin to grow. Still, obviously, a very high number, which is why they make so many veligers. Eventually, once they attach and are able to mature, they'll begin filter feeding. They feed on the plankton and other small critters that float in the water that some of our native species also eat. But they filter through the water and eat all the plankton and various other critters. And eventually, they'll grow to be large enough and mature enough where they can reproduce. And zebra mussels do reproduce sexually, so that means that they need a male and a female to reproduce. And the means that they do that is the males and females both release clouds of their sex cells. So the females release clouds of egg cells and the males release clouds of sperm cells. You can see just how many per year they're able to create. So they're very efficient reproducers, and you can see sort of how this will grow exponentially over time as more offspring are born, able to attach and reproduce at this rate. So that's why you see zebra mussels really take over water bodies eventually. There are a few things that they need in the water. The two most important are oxygen and calcium. So we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but those are two of the things that we're looking at with a very careful eye in Candlewood Lake in light of their requirements for zebra mussel growth. But I wanted to show you all an example of zebra mussel colonies from Lake Lillonona. This is what it looks like eventually once zebra mussels are able to fully set up a population in a body of water. So as we mentioned, they reproduce by creating those clouds where, a sperm cell will meet an egg cell. And it's actually often so close to the adults that they'll attach and grow on top of each other. So you'll see colony structures similar to this. And it's worth noting that each of these are from one dock that came out of Lake Lillona this past year. So you can see just how the structure begins to grow.
And so we should add that this is the growth from one season. There were no live zebra mussels on these docks when they went in last spring. When they came out this fall, this is what was, and that's just one little section of dock. The docks were full of them.
Yep.
So
yeah.
They grow fast and they grow in a single season.
Yep. And so we will talk a little bit more specifically. We'll zoom in on this region. Steve, if you want to talk a little bit more about this.
Yep. So there are various government agencies, clearly interested in seeing what's going on with all kinds of invasive species. And by the way, the zebras aren't the only invasive species that we're worried about at Candlewood. And you can see there, Twin Lakes, Connecticut, that was where they first showed up in 1998. And we didn't find them anywhere else until 2009 when they appeared in Laurel Lake. These, the size and the color of the dots have to do with how many individuals were found. It turns out that Laurel Lake has a lot of zebra mussels, and those Laurel Lake drains directly into the Houstonic, right alongside the Houstonic. And apparently those veligers, the small larvae, travel down the Houstonic really quickly and ended up in Lake Lillona and Lake Zor. And it took another 10 years before they showed up in Candlewood Lake. But in May of 2020, divers that were specifically scouring the bottom of the lake in various places looking for zebra mussels found one. That was the first confirmed find. And Neil, take it.
And so we created a monitoring program where we can sort of begin tracking the current state in Candlewood. And actually, I'm gonna let Steve tell you a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got the slides out of order. So in response to this, we figured, well, we got to find out where these things are in Candlewood Lake. Neil, point to the first find right there on the tip of Vaughn's Neck. So that was the first one. That was May of 2020. And, Neil and I were talking about, hey, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, when the water's up high, there's not a lot you can do. And there was only one. The divers went back out. They looked, they scoured that area again. And that was the only one they found. So we're thinking, well, is this a one-off? What's going on? However, we knew that we were scheduled for a deep drawdown this year. And so with the help of some community members that were interested, I set up this map, and as people scoured the shoreline looking for them, we would put in the areas that were searched and not found. All those places are green, but the red dots are individual zebra mussels that were found, and the red areas are where we found more than one. And so we have a little hot spot right by Hollywile, where Ball Pond Brook comes in, and we're going to zoom in on that in the next slide. And now it's Neil's turn.
Yep. So I'll talk a little bit more about this zone. Obviously, it's not the only place that we found zebra mussels, but it is the place where we found the highest density of zebra mussels. So I want to sort of give you more of a timeline of exactly how the discovery happened. Obviously, the first was found in May. As many of you here know, you may have gotten an email or saw on our Facebook that in late October, early November, Harry Tucker and Sons, the company that removes many of the docks on Candlewood Lake, removed a dock from this area here, north of Hollywile Cove, that had about 6 to 12 zebra mussels attached to it. I immediately went out and looked at it. Sure enough, they were zebra mussels and they were attached to that dock. This is the point that's representing that discovery. We also took a look at the neighboring docks. There were no zebra mussels growing on any of those docks, but we knew to sort of leave this area as a critical spot we wanted to search when we got the deep drawdown. So when that happened, a team of folks from the CLA and a couple of folks from WestCon went out and searched this area in the morning. And keep in mind, this is about 100 yards of shoreline here. And we found 9 adult mussels. And so you can see those there in the Ziploc baggie here. These are the 9 solitary mussels that we found. Now, it's important to note that they were not forming colonies like that picture that we saw in Little Nona. They were all solitary mussels that were actually spread apart at least a couple of meters from each other. So it's interesting. They're not reproducing at a rate where they're able to colonize in that way like we saw in Little Nona. After this search, those folks that I mentioned that from WestCon, they actually went and did a second search down here on this cove south of the point, and they also found an additional 9 mussels, similar in description and size to these. They were not colonizing. They were all separate and solitary. But here in this zone, that means we had 18 from those 2 searches plus the 12 from the dock. And just to put that in context, we found a total of 39 so far in Candlewood along the whole lake. So that is a substantial amount of those discoveries were in this one area. We've mentioned this a couple of times to you before. We were actually a little lucky this year. I hesitate to use the word lucky, but we had a scheduled deep drawdown for this winter. So many of you in the call may know that Candlewood winters work on a rotating schedule of a shallow and a deep drawdown. So the power company that owns the lake, First Light Power, controls the lake levels. And in the winter, they'll draw down the water so that it's you lose water level and you expose shoreline in an effort to actually control the invasive plants that are in Candlewood Lake. This year, it just so happened, had already been scheduled to be a deep drawdown. So we were able to go out and conduct those searches ourselves, and the community was able to go out and do all of those searches that you saw on that map earlier in the presentation. So that has been a benefit of the low lake level. Another benefit that's certainly worth mentioning is exposure to the air is actually a very efficient way to kill zebra mussels. So if a zebra mussel is exposed to the air and is no longer under the water, so say a zebra mussel was attached to a rock in this area right here, it would no longer be able to survive compared to if it were under the water in this area here. The research points to if the temperatures are below freezing, zebra mussels will survive for less than 24 hours, actually, if exposed to the air. If the temperatures are above freezing, it takes a maximum of 6 days. The only other thing we wanted to address with these photos is you can see the first photo here was taken before the snows that we've gotten. The second photo was taken after, and actually before some of the additional snow that we've since gotten. As you can imagine, it's much easier to search and spot zebra mussels when there's no snow, since they attach to these hard surfaces that are then covered in snow. Thankfully, the snow does not protect them from no longer being able to survive. So even if they're buried under the snow, they will still die if exposed to the air.
And particularly with the prolonged amount of time they're exposed, yeah.
Yeah.
So I searched my waterfront early on as soon as the water started dropping. And I just wanted to show you a couple of the critters that I found. The 2 clams that you see on the left there, and by the way, that's a centimeter scale, so they're not very big. The biggest one is about 1.5 inches long. Those are native clams, and there are several well, I guess a couple different species of native clams that live in Candlewood. These are two of them, and you're likely to find them if you're poking around. This guy on the left was alive when I found him. He opened up in my hand. I took a few pictures, measured him, and returned the two of those right there on the left back to the lake. The others were dead already, and those are invasive clams, but they're not invasive like the zebra mussels are. They don't overrun everything. These are called Asian clams, and they're quite common in Candlewood now. If you search your shoreline or search a shoreline, you're likely to find a few of those shells, and you get an idea of about how big they are. Smallest one over there is about the size of your thumbnail, and so you can judge the size of the rest of them.
So we wanted to quickly illustrate to you sort of one of the best ways to search for zebra mussels, and it can be actually a little more difficult than it looks. As you can see sort of on this left picture, you have a zoomed in picture of some of the rocks on the lake shore. You can see this hammer here for scale. And we wanted to take a picture of this location because when zebra mussels when the villagers are looking for a place to settle and attach, they actually prefer areas of low water flow and sort of rocky, rough surfaces that are a little easier to attach to.
They're successful in those areas where
Yep.
they're protected. Yeah.
So we wanted to take these pictures as an example of some of those areas where you might be able to see zebra mussels.
And if you look at, go ahead, Neil.
No,
Sorry.
Go for it, Steve.
So if you look at the right-hand photo, that's pretty much the center of the photo with the hammer zoomed in. And that's how close you have to get to look for those little guys. And you have to look in the crevices. You have to look around for them. So in that photograph right there, Neil, that little gray thing right in the middle, I mean, that could be a zebra mussel. You have to get down and check. Or it could be down under the shadow there. They like eroding cement with all those pebbles. They have lots of little, they're shielded, they're protected. And so if we talk about the search we did over where the dock was found by Kellogg Point there were three of us crawling around on our hands and knees for an hour and a half to find those 9 zebra mussels. And so searching for them isn't trivial, and it's not something you just walk along and say, oh, didn't see any. You really have to get, down and dirty as you're looking for them. And that's been the case with most of the searches that have occurred on the lake. Okay, we're good. Yep.
Great. So I wanted to, before we get into the specific management activities of the Candlewood Lake Authority, I wanted to illustrate to everyone in the webinar sort of the complicated landscape of how Candlewood Lake is managed and all of the stakeholders around the lake. As many of you may know, there are 5 municipalities that have land that includes Candlewood Lake. Those towns are Sherman, New Milford, Brookfield, Danbury, and New Fairfield. Many of you, I bet, are members of one of those towns. And so they naturally have an interest both in protecting the lake, but also in a responsibility to manage the lake to some degree. And so they certainly have an interest in what's going on the lake. Of course, there's the lake community, so that includes everyone in this call, but everyone who has a home around the lake, all the private communities that are around the lake, and people in the town. If you live uphill of the lake, all of the water that lands in your lawn or driveway will eventually end up in Candlewood Lake. So they're actually a part of the lake community, whether they like it or not, or whether they know it or not. So many of the town residents are part of the lake community. And then everyone who uses the lake for fun, to go out and boat, anyone who comes, visits, and drops their boat in the water, anyone who comes to one of the beaches and goes swimming, they're all part of the lake community too. And everyone has an interest in Candlewood Lake and wants to continue to protect it. Of course, there are the businesses that both use and rely on Candlewood Lake. So the marinas and the nearby restaurants and other commercial interests that either need the lake to continue to do business or get customers from folks that come to use the lake. So those folks obviously have varying responsibilities and management of the lake too. But the big major players, First Light Power is of course the owner of the lake. They control the lake levels, and they manage the land that they own, which includes the island and a lot of the shoreline as well. And so their other main interest, of course, is using the lake to generate power. So as Steve mentioned, and as we've talked about with the drawdown, First Light can let water out of Kenwood Lake down a penstock and generate electricity with it. And so that's one of their interests too. Connecticut Deep, they are a law enforcement agency that exists on the lake. So they have a boat and enforce boating law and state law on the lake. They also own two of the ramps, two of the public access points on the lake. That's Latins Cove down here and Squance Cove up here on the map. And so they manage those boat ramps. They have employees that are there sometimes, and they manage the parking and who gets to use them and all of that good stuff. And then there's the state legislature. So all those laws that Connecticut Deep is enforcing, that all inevitably came from the state legislature. They make many of the laws that govern Candlewood Lake and all of the lakes in Connecticut. And then I wanted to end, of course, with us, the Candlewood Lake Authority. We have an interest in educating the community like we're doing tonight. We also, of course, have our Marine Patrol that enforces boating law on the lake. So many of you have probably seen those folks out there in our patrol boats. And so all of these folks, including us, have a stake and a responsibility to some degree in managing Candlewood Lake. And one of our main efforts is to try to have all of these groups mesh together and meet so that we're all moving in the same direction to responsibly manage Candlewood and make sure we're all educated and sort of on the same page about what's going on, which is part of why we're doing this tonight.
Neil, I just want to add one thing about First Light. It says First Light FERC there, and if you're not aware of it, FERC is the government agency that issues the permit that First Light operates under. First Light has a shoreline management plan. They have the details of First Light's management of the lake is not. It's not just what they feel like doing. They operate under a permit, and they have to renew that permit. And things that they want to do are often reviewed by the federal government. So it's important to realize how multi-pronged all of the management of Candlewood Lake is, and how important it is for Candlewood Lake Authority to kind of be the hub of all of those different groups and bring them together, share concerns. So that's been a big part of what we've been doing the past year.
Definitely. No, thank you for catching that, Steve. I definitely wanted to mention that. So now that you sort of understand the political landscape and management landscape of Candlewood Lake, we want to talk about what we've been able to do, the Candlewood Lake Authority, with all of those stakeholders to try to manage the current situation regarding zebra mussels in the short term and in the long term. So in the short term, you guys have heard about the drawdown, and we've mentioned how it's one of the most effective ways at killing living zebra mussels. Having had a meeting with First Light to talk about the drawdown and talking with other interested members of the community, we worked with them to ensure that the drawdown will go as deep as possible this winter. So it's going to go down to the 418-foot elevation marker. Some of you may know the notorious 440 line. That's the high level of the lake that it can go to. We've asked them, and they agreed to go down to the 418 mark. So what that is going to do is it's going to expose as many of the zebra mussels that may have been able to settle out and grow from this area on the shoreline as possible and kill them. Now, it's no guarantee that it will be able to manage all of them. There may still be some that are able to survive under the lake here, but it certainly does maximize our chances of managing as best as we can.
Neil, can I interrupt for 1 second? With the lake level, First Light owns to the 440 line, to the 440-foot elevation, but the lake is at full pond when it's 429.5 feet. So this winter, the level will drop about 11 feet. And that's what you really have to know. So when the lake is full in the spring, when they pump it all the way back up, it'll be a little over 429 feet. But 11 feet is a pretty good stretch of water. That's a large part of the habitable zone for the zebra mussels.
Thank you for clarifying that,
yep.
Steve.
And
yeah,
we know some of the chemistry of the lake is such that they can't survive below about 15 feet because there's not enough oxygen down there during the height of the summer. So we're lucky and we're thankful for the fact that there's the deep drawdown.
Yeah, so we're able to get sort of the two birds with one stone, management from the drawdown and also the ability to continue to search, as we mentioned before. So that's why we wanted to maximize the depth, and we're grateful to First Light that they were willing to have that meeting with us and work with us on that. The other thing we wanted to mention to everyone is Deep, the folks that own the two boat launches on Candlewood Lake that we mentioned before, as well as manage a lot of the environmental issues around the state. They had a new grant program this year that we applied for to have a lake steward program. So the Candlewood Lake Authority employees that would rotate around the public launches on Candlewood Lake. So that's those two state launches that I mentioned, as well as 5 launches for each of the municipalities around the lake. And we would station employees, those lake stewards, at each of those launches, and they would offer voluntary boat inspections, invasive species education. They would greet boaters when they arrive and tell them, basically why they're there, what they're doing, warn them about invasive species. Because as Steve mentioned to you at the beginning of the presentation, one of the key ways that zebra mussels are able to move from water body to water body is by attaching to recreational boaters or by stowing away in sitting water that might be in your boat, whether that's in the bilge or in the ballast, things like that. So these employees will offer those inspections, make sure that the boat is cleaned of any invasive species, remove any visible invasive species, make sure it's drained of any water that's in it, in the bilge, ballast, live well, that sort of thing. And then if there were signs of invasive species, offer locations where they can go and wash their boat and dry it so that it's actually safe to move between water bodies. So we're looking forward to hearing about that grant to fund that program. We're very excited about it, and all of the towns in excited about it too. So we're very optimistic about that program being able to be in place for this upcoming season. The last thing I wanted to mention is that we're actively working on is we're in conversation with our state representative that represent areas that contain Candlewood Lake to talk about what needs to potentially change in order to increase protections for the lake. We've suggested that they pursue legislation that might include making those inspections that we are including in our grant program mandatory to launch in the lake, among other more nuanced protective measures that can be taken at the ramps. But we are basically advocating for more control at the ramps so that we can ensure that there's not any invasive species that are able to sort of stow away on people's boats before they launch in the water. And so we're working with them on that, and we're hoping to see some progress, and word seems good from our conversations with them that progress is going to get made. So we're excited about that as well. I wanted to tell you guys a little bit about what we have planned for the upcoming season. Obviously, the drawdown is not going to be forever. And so our work monitoring for zebra mussels isn't going to end either. The first thing that we have planned are CLA sponsored zebra mussel dives. So we did, there were a few dives this past summer. We're planning on expanding that to include additional dives starting at the very beginning of the year, this upcoming season. And they'll be in strategic locations. So like that hotspot that we showed you near Hollywild Cove, in the upcoming spring, we're hoping to send divers there to go and take a look, see if they can see any potential adults that are growing. Another program that we had this past summer that we're hoping to include in next summer and expand are the DIY zebra mussel hotels, we call them. You can see here our volunteers are holding a cinder block and a rope. These DIY hotels are as simple as tying a cinder block to the end of your dock and leaving it in the water for a few weeks, going and checking to see if there's anything growing on there and letting us know if you see anything. These cinder blocks are actually excellent locations for zebra mussels to attach and grow onto. So that's why we call them hotels. If there's nothing growing on these, that's a good sign that they're not growing in other parts of the lake as well.
When those blocks are put in infested waters, they come out, you can hardly tell it's a cinder block. And we've had quite a few deployed around Candlewood, and they've all come back negative so far. So we're at the very, very, very early stage of zebras in Candlewood. So what a lot of this invasive species stuff tells us is that we have to learn even more about Candlewood. Neil and I have spent significant time out on Candlewood and Lake Zor doing various kinds of science. If you look in the upper right there, that's the boat that we had at the beginning of last summer. That boat ended up being commandeered by the Marine Patrol and ultimately died of hull failure. So we spent the rest of the time in my own boat or in the little aluminum boat that we have that we trailer around into squants to search. And if you look on the left side there, you can see that the research has continued through the winter. That little round thing that you see in the foreground there is our probe. Takes all kinds of environmental measurements. We lower that thing down. We do vertical profiles through the lake. And we have to do more of that. If you look on the lower right, there's Neil. We'll go out and we'll spend a whole day doing rake tosses and pulling up the weeds and seeing what the weeds look like, what species there are. And it turns out there are some natives that survive in Candlewood. Pretty much everybody's familiar with the milfoil. We're keeping an eye out for yet some that haven't showed up here. A weed called hydrilla, and another one that you may know is water chestnut. So far, we don't have them here, and if they come here, they're going to come in on boats. And so that's another reason why we want to do that. If you look in the lower left, well, look at the middle one. There's Neil giving a thumbs up. I'll tell you, we spend days out there on the lake, hours and hours and hours, to the point where it's not even fun anymore, right, Neil?
Yeah, that's right.
No, we always enjoy the end of those days, yeah. But there's Neil throwing a net over the side of the boat, and we've been looking for those veligers. The net concentrates the lake water. We collect that lake water, and then it's looked at under a microscope to see if we can find those veligers. So we're monitoring carefully, but I just want to say this now, while we have this audience here, we need more. We need more equipment. We need another boat. We need time, and we need laboratory equipment and laboratory money. And so as you think about, your taxes that you're paying to the town and whatever you can donate, Candlewood Lake Authority operates pretty much on a shoestring. A lot of volunteers, the 15 delegates from the 5 towns, all volunteer their time, and we need to grow. So I'll leave it at that.
And I also just want to add, Steve mentioned the rake tosses that we do, and that reminded me, I wanted to mention this when I was talking about our watershed steward program, our lake steward program. But not only are we inspecting boats and offering invasive species education about zebra mussels, but also about all sorts of invasive plants and other invasive species too. For example, two of the ones that we're particularly concerned about are water chestnut and hydrilla. So not only are we, on the lookout for zebra mussels, but we're also on the lookout for those invasives. We don't have any signs of them in Candlewood yet, but we need to stay ever vigilant so that they also can't disrupt Candlewood's ecosystem.
And before you go on, Neil, I wanted to add this. Hopefully we have a stopgap boat coming for this summer, and hopefully we'll have quite a presence with that environmental boat out on the lake. And so if you see us out there, come by, say hi. We can show you some of the equipment that we're using. We can tell you some of the stuff that we're finding. And we hope to be able to take interested residents out for a day or for a couple of hours every once in a while so they can see the kind of stuff that we're doing. But do look for the, it won't say Marine Patrol, it'll say environmental, whatever. Come look for that boat. And if you see us, come over and say hi. We'd love to talk to you.
So I will just quickly wrap us up with how the community can get involved, how you guys can get involved if you'd like to. The single best location to keep up on updates, ways to get involved is going to be our website. That's candlewoodlakeauthority.org. It's here on the bottom of the presentation. And this is what you're going to see when you go to candlewoodlakeauthority.org. If you click this button, Zebra Mussel Response, that I've circled here, this will take you to sort of our Zebra Mussel HQ, where you can find information about zebra mussels, a fact sheet. You can find that map that we showed you. You can find the form where you can, if you'd like to, once the snow sort of melts away, and if the lake is still down, you can conduct your own search for zebra mussels and submit it on that map if you'd like to. And all sorts of good information. We'll also be posting on this page if there's potential legislation that you might be able to support that is relevant to invasive species, whether it's zebra mussels or otherwise. And so definitely keep a lookout here. The other place that we'll keep everyone updated on ways that they can get involved, whether that's legislation that they can support or doing your own DIY zebra mussel hotel, for example. You can go to our website and click on Stay Informed up here in the top right. And that'll sign you up for our email list, where you'll get all of our newsletters, all of our volunteer opportunities, ways to get involved, all that great stuff. And then make sure to follow our Facebook. Just search Candlewood Lake Authority on Facebook and give us a follow, and all of that information will be there too.
And I just want to add that if you hit that Zebra Mussel Response button, you'll also have access to the live map, and you can zoom in on your waterfront there, the whole thing. And there's also a form there that you can use. If you search a section of shoreline, you can report that to us, and we'll enter that on the map as well. So there's a lot of stuff there and a lot of ways for you to get involved.
And with that, I want to thank everyone for coming, and please urge you, if you have questions, put them in the chat box here on Zoom, and Mark, our executive director, will read them out, and we'll go ahead and answer them for you. But thank you so much to those of you who came, and please don't hesitate to ask any questions.
All right, so there's actually been a bunch of questions already coming in.
Great.
So I will read them, and we'll get to as many as we can before 8 o'clock. So I'll start here now. So one of the questions is, do zebra mussels usually attach near the shoreline as opposed to deeper areas?
Steve, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So they like hard surfaces. If they're right where all the waves are hitting, they're probably not going to be in the top couple inches, although they do survive well on docks. But if the waves are breaking on stones, maybe not so much. The ones that we found were all probably within the first 4 or 5 feet of the water. They can live deeper, but we find that the lake becomes anoxic at about 5 meters during a good part of the summer. And so without that oxygen, they can't survive. So between this deep drawdown and where zebra mussels, where we believe can exist, there's still a few feet of water where they could exist. Now, our divers have looked, and we will be looking, particularly in that hot spot. But yes, they can survive deeper. The only ones that we found were the one at Fawn's Neck, the one the divers found, was at 13 feet. So that was deeper than the deepest drawdown. So yes, they're there. We have not found them in abundance. That doesn't mean they're not there, but we'll be looking very carefully this coming season.
So I'm gonna combine a sort of a couple of questions, but the basic question is sort of wondering about the impacts of a deep drawdown. You know, whether it's on the native clams or on the fish populations, and you know, wondering about that impact versus the benefits of trying to eliminate zebra mussels.
That's an excellent
Double-edged sword, Neil, go for it.
Awesome. Yeah, that is a very good question. So with all of the management activities on lakes like Candlewood, it's sort of a balancing act. That's what, you know, lake managers often have to do is balance management activities for the ecosystem, and the drawdown is one of those things that you have to balance. So one of the good things that the drawdown does is it helps manage invasive species. So that's the plants that we mentioned, the Eurasian water milfoil, and also zebra mussels. But by the same way that it helps manage invasive species, it's also going to wipe out native species. So that includes those clams that Steve showed you. Those are native, crawfish, native plants, anything that's in that band where the shoreline is exposed. Basically, if the temperatures are cold enough, they are going to die. So you need to make sure that you are still allowing enough room for those native organisms that are really beneficial to the Candlewood Lake ecosystem to continue to survive, but also managing the invasives in a way that's responsible. And so we are doing that balancing work with First Light, with Deep, all of the organizations that have a hand in managing that and have the expertise to inform that decision. The other thing that I do want to mention that's another potential drawback of long-term deep drawdowns like this is it does increase erosion. So what that means is when the shoreline is exposed, sediments and soils that are exposed on the shoreline actually end up loosening and can become part of the lake, and those can bring in all sorts of nutrients that plankton and blue-green algae, that sort of thing, can feed on and grow in the following season. So you don't want to do too much drawing down and increase erosion that would then allow the algae and other nasty creatures to be able to grow more abundantly the following season too. So, you know, we're doing that balance, and we're not alone in figuring out what that balance is, but we're keeping all of that in mind.
Okay. Another question is, the question is basically asking about the pump up and why we're not seeing massive zebra mussels coming up through the pump up. How is that controlled?
I can take this one too, Steve. So the zebra mussel veligers that we mentioned, their larvae, that's how they start off their life. They actually can only they can only survive in water temperatures that are above about 54 degrees Fahrenheit. So when the water temperature in the Housatonic River, which does have zebra mussels, goes below 54 degrees, there's actually no risk of transporting any zebra mussel veligers in that water. So historically, what First Light has done is they've voluntarily offered not to pump up water into Candlewood Lake from the Housatonic, basically whenever the water temperature is above 54 degrees. So that's actually why you only see water getting pumped up into Candlewood in the winter, because that's the only time the water goes below that temperature and you're not transporting zebra mussel veligers.
And when they pumped up this last fall, the temperature was in the mid 40s, low 40s. So we're pretty comfortable that that's not where they're coming in.
So there's a question about the 9 zebra mussels that were found. If you're finding 9 in an area, does that not mean that they are breeding?
I didn't hear the whole question.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was about the 9 zebra mussels that were found in one area. Does that mean that that is a breeding population with that area there?
It indicates that there was probably some breeding happening. The question is if it was efficient enough to establish a large scale population. When the zebra mussels sort of push out those clouds, obviously you need a male and a female, and it's sort of up to chance whether the sperm and the egg are able to actually meet in the water, since they just go through natural flow. So when you're only talking about 9 adults, and the size indicates that they actually are all new this year, they're not so large that they've clearly survived more than one season. It's certainly possible that they were reproducing in the lake, but it's not impossible that they were coming from one single source. They all came from one reproducing adult pair in that one location from, say, a dock or a boat.
There could have been veligers in a bait well, or in a bilge of a boat. Somebody flips on their bilge pump and a whole bunch of veligers get out. It is important to note that we did not find any colonies in that area. They were individuals. I know we've said it before, but we didn't find anything that looked like a breeding colony of them. However, that's going to be one of our prime searches next season when we send the divers down to look in that area. We have a fairly limited area, and I'll just make the argument for more science too. We don't really even know how water moves in Candlewood. It's not like it moves in Zor or in Lilanona. It's pretty clear. It's the flow of the river, and they dam it up for a while and they let it out, but it's always getting refreshed with new water. Candlewood Lake water, we have water coming in right there at Hollywild. It's coming in from Ball Pond Brook. No zebra mussels up in Ball Pond, so we don't think the brook is bringing them in, but the brook might be bringing the right chemistry that supports them better than other parts of the lake. So we really have to really upgrade our monitoring so we can figure out, said it earlier, the best ways to manage, to respond and to manage this new threat.
And the final thing I'll add is it does take time for the zebra mussels to grow large enough to then be able to reproduce. And the size of the mussels that have been found in Candlewood are right on that edge of where they would be viable adults able to reproduce, or perhaps not. So between that size and not having any tests that have come back indicating the presence of zebra mussel veligers under a microscope, which Steve mentioned that we do, we can't confirm whether there's been any.
Neil mentioned the DNA testing too. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so not only are we able to look for the veligers under a microscope with that plankton net that we showed you in the photo, but there are actually tests to test for the presence of the sperm and the egg cells from zebra mussels, or the veligers themselves, looking for basically their DNA, so their specific DNA markers. Thanks to WestCon for having those tests, and we were able to conduct one of those tests this past year in a few locations, and that came back negative for zebra mussel DNA as well. We plan to pursue doing additional tests in the key areas that we mentioned to you with WestCon this upcoming summer. But they would come back negative unless the water temperature was above 54 degrees, like we mentioned. So we have to wait to do those tests.
Neil, Steve, one thing that Steve was mentioning, there was a question along those lines, was sort of about water chemistry. And And the question was about the calcium levels where the mussels are being found.
Yep.
Just wanted to expand upon what we have in the lake.
Yep. So the current levels in general in the lake, there's a few differences depending on the location, but on average, we're at about 20 milligrams per liter. Oops, I'm sorry, I stopped my screen share. And so when we, so we're at about 20 milligrams per liter in the lake. So for every liter of water in Candlewood Lake, there's about 20 milligrams of soluble calcium that can be used by the zebra mussels. That's right on the edge of being enough to support a healthy zebra mussel population. So we can't say for certain that it's so low that they would not be able to survive, but we also can't say for certain that it's high enough that it would be able to support a reproducing and effective population. So unfortunately, we're right in the gray area scientifically, where it's possible they could exist, but we can't know for certain.
However, the long-term trend has been gradually increasing calcium levels in Candlewood, and we're addressing those possible sources as well.
Yeah, there's a number of sources where that could be coming from, but Steve, thank you for mentioning that. The trend is sadly going the wrong way slowly, so we're trying to address that as well.
One sort of simple question, a little bit unrelated, but I want to get the answer out there. And I can answer this so you guys can take a little break. But the question is the meeting going to be posted on your website or someplace? Because we did bump up against our Zoom limit of people. So yes, the answer to that question is yes, we are recording this and we will make that available for people to watch later on.
Yep. So stay tuned on our website and email and Facebook for the recording to share with your friends and watch again with your family over dinner. I'm sure that's what everyone would like to watch with there. But yes.
And the fact that we bumped up against our Zoom limit is disappointing in some ways, but it's great that so many of you, checked in tonight. This is important stuff. We all love Candlewood and we really want to protect it. And we're at a point now where we really, really have to pull together to keep Candlewood the gem that it is. So thanks everybody for tuning in and spread the word.
We've got 1 minute left and I'm going to do one more quick question and then we'll figure out a way. There's more questions than we have time to get to, but we will try and figure out a way to get answers to everybody's questions. So, and
we'll put them on the website.
Yeah, we'll figure something out. But one other question was sort of about the distribution of the mussels and where we found them. The question was, is it at the penstock? Are they being found at boat launches? So maybe you guys can just touch on just really quickly again and show sort of where they have been found so far.
Steve, you can take that one if you want.
Okay, well, let's answer the penstock one first. So two adults were found in the penstock this fall, 2 adults, right? And those, we had a drawdown late summer or, early fall. Or I'm sorry, later fall, we had a drawdown. And it would be my assumption that those things got transported there as water was being drawn down. They were found after the drawdown there. We don't have evidence of, and the dam there and Lindemming have been scoured carefully. Some of that area there, right just south of the Narrows, has been looked at very carefully. A little bit south of there, I've crawled that section of Lakeshore significantly. So has Larry Marsicano. You might know Larry's name. So we've looked at those places and we haven't seen them really in the Milford Arm. Of course, there's a lot of shore we haven't discovered. But I think the important thing to see is there is no pattern other than our hotspot right there where Neil's pointing right now. We can't say, oh, it's the boat launches. Neil and I crawled the rocks at the Danbury launch. I crawled the rocks at the Latins Cove launch. We've had First Light and a few other people have looked carefully in Squan's Cove there. We found an individual, but we haven't found an infestation. So,
Yeah,
you know,
and I'll just add to what Steve is saying. And obviously, there's these solitary ones that were found in other locations, and a few others. You know, here in the Danbury Arm, a couple near the Squan's Ramp up here, the one off of Vaughn's. So actually, what this indicates to us is that it's actually possible there may have been more than one event where you did get, you know, one or two zebra mussels, a few veligers, that sort of thing, in different locations. We're still trying to figure out exactly the possible sources, but the distribution not only makes it hard to manage them because they're so far away from each other, but it also makes it hard to figure out exactly where they came from. We're getting to the bottom of it, but it'll take more searching and more science to figure it out.
All right, well, we are at the 8 o'clock time limit. We're a little bit past it. So like I said, we will figure out a way to try and capture a lot of these questions and get more information out to people. And this seems like it was a popular event. So we hope to be able to do these again in the future. Thanks to everybody for joining us. And of course, thank you, Neil and Steve, for spending the time tonight and teaching us all about zebra mussels.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone who joined, and I look forward to working with everyone and talking to you all this upcoming summer.
And look for me and Neil out there and come over and say hi.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.